Thank you, Odessa. Greg Michio, my company is Winbound. We are a sponsor for Craft Marketing every month. I want to welcome everyone who is showing up here virtually. Normally we started this out doing it face-to-face at a local brew pub, but COVID, so we've done the virtual thing, and always great to see all these different new faces show up at these events. We've had people from, I think last month we had Budapest and Venice. So people are coming in from all over, which is great. And shout out to all of the folks in the manufacturing sector that Chris has brought in through publicizing the event. Welcome to you all. Winbound, what we do is content marketing, and we focus on helping small marketing departments, especially with manufacturers. And part of doing that is creating great content, and it's a very collaborative process. And so it's natural for us to collaborate with AMA Madison producing this event. And likewise, we like to collaborate with experts in the field. And that's how I met Chris Luecke. Chris is, as we call him here, salesperson 2.0. I met him I think it was at the beginning of the year, Chris.
I think so.
Through a mutual friend. We got a little LinkedIn engagement pod we started up, and we started sharing content with each other. Chris's background, he was a sales rep, and I'll let him go through all the details. But he started out, he was working with Rockwell Automation as an account executive, and then he launched this podcast. And I'm going to let him take you through the story, but it's really pretty remarkable, the following that Chris has built on LinkedIn with his podcast, and just by delivering great content month after month and via the podcast. So we're going to do the format a little bit differently this month. Because Chris is a podcaster, we want him to feel very comfortable. And so we're going to treat this like a podcast. And I am going to play the role of the interviewer here. I have the easy part, and I'm going to throw some questions at Chris. And if you have some questions you'd like Chris to answer, just please put them in the chat. Hopefully we can roll through them. So let's jump in, right, Chris? Okay, why don't you just start us out? Tell us about your journey. Tell us about your background, and first of all, how you wound up in the sales position at Rockwell, and then how did that lead to Manufacturing Happy Hour?
Sure. So great introduction. Excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I know, Greg, you've been on a couple of my community happy hours and things like that. So it's exciting to be on your home turf this time. But yeah, my name's Chris Luecke. I was an account manager at Rockwell Automation for the start of my career. As a salesperson, I'm going to be keeping that hat on, though, for the course of this conversation in terms of keeping with the salesperson 2.0 theme. But yeah, my career at Rockwell Automation included, about half my time in the Houston, Texas market, serving what I would say more of an old school industry, heavy industries, oil and gas, chemical. And then for the second half as an account manager, serving equipment builders and high tech companies out in the Bay Area. So two very different markets at the end of the day. In Texas, obviously this is pre-COVID, relationships, handshakes, face-to-face meetings, more experienced individuals making the decisions at the companies that had been with their companies for 20, 30 years, so I'll just say old school sales methods work down there. You had your typical sales call, had your typical face-to-face meetings, your lunches, you still have your sales cycle there, but a lot of it was face-to-face. You flip that on its head, moving to the Bay Area, all of a sudden you're calling on companies that have a bunch of 20 and 30 somethings making decisions. And, not that they don't value a face-to-face meeting, but as someone that's a millennial myself, we're making decisions a little differently. We're consuming a lot of info on video. We're listening to podcasts. So Manufacturing Happy Hour, the podcast that I started about 4 years ago, originally as just a YouTube series. Now it's turned into a video series and a podcast and a community. So it's expanded over that time. it really started out of necessity. I needed a way to reach my customer base in a way that was meeting them where they were. Like I said, face-to-face meetings still relevant, but maybe a little less relevant than they were in Houston. So it really was born out of necessity.
Okay, so you're in the Bay Area, and
Mhm.
you're originally from St. Louis. Now, you went to school at Marquette University.
Mhm.
We won't dwell on that. That's okay. That happened. So, we're talking here at the home of the UW Badgers, but you start going into, you realize you need to reach your customers. Tell us about launching the podcast. How'd you learn about it, and how did it all come to fruition?
That's a great question. And I always like sharing the story of like my first pilot episode. And it was a pilot video episode. And when I do this in presentation format, I show a picture because for whatever reason, I had the forethought at the time to take a picture of my original setup, but it was a selfie stick propped up by books on four sides, with my iPhone just sitting up there in my office on a Saturday. And I'd been thinking about this for a while because I used to play in cover bands. I'm an extrovert's extrovert at the end of the day. I like being on camera. I like being behind a microphone. And I'm just like, sales is a good career. I feel like I'm able to utilize a lot of my skill set, but I think, just that meeting of, hey, there's a necessity to meet my customers now with digital content. And also that, I think this is a skill set I haven't used in a while, and I should see if I can combine it into one thing, resulted in me being like, I'm going to record a pilot episode. So I hit record on that iPhone, and I recorded like a 3-minute video that I sent to a bunch of my mentors and colleagues at Rockwell, probably like a short list of 10 or 15. I'm like, guys, I've got this idea. What if I cracked a beer and in the course of a short video, talked about our technology over, the course of 2 or 3 minutes? And it's one of those things. Usually, Greg, you might be asking this question at one point. It's like, well, how do you start a beer podcast when you work for a big corporation? How do you not get slapped on the wrist for that? It's like, well, I was just focusing on my immediate customer base on the time. I really wasn't promoting it on YouTube yet. I'm just like, hey, this will be something fun I'll do for my customers who know me. I'll send it in a newsletter. And anyway, that's how it was born. Just getting a little bit of validation from some peers, doing that initial video, getting the courage to hit record, which I always say, at the end of the day, you have all the tools you need to start a podcast or a video series right with you. Your smartphone can do everything that you need like a bunch of different equipment to do. So equipment's never an excuse. It's just having that message and starting to get it out there.
Right. We're going to get to equipment in just a little bit. What I really like about what you just said there, Chris, is, you just started small. You started very simple little video. I don't know if you had this vision of, where you are now with this, but you're really just trying to reach your customer base. How did you distribute that first video? I'm curious.
Yeah, good question. So, I posted them all to YouTube from the get-go. But really, it was a small thing. I would post to YouTube, and then I'd put a little picture link in a newsletter that I sent to my customers. I had done customer newsletters for years before that. And in fact, this is a completely different conversation. I still feel like every salesperson that calls on an account package should have a newsletter where, maybe it's a monthly thing. You talk to your customers, but I basically just turned a written newsletter into a video newsletter. And that's all it was for the first 9 months. We'd shoot a video, we'd shoot a batch of videos and we'd release one every 2 weeks. It wasn't anything major at that point. Like you said, starting small. It wasn't until about 9 months in that I started to share it on LinkedIn and realize, okay, this could be something bigger.
Right. So, and we're big fans of the newsletter. It's so easy when you are creating content for lead gen, just to get it out there, to repackage it and just send it to your clients. It's just like a no-brainer. And then you stay in front of your clients. So you start the video, and then did you start to generate any leads, or is this just to stay in touch with your current customers? Like, how did it get to a lead gen point?
Yeah, I was reflecting on this earlier today because it's a unique thing, a podcast or a video series. It accomplishes so like at least a handful of things in terms of staying front of mind with your customers and generating leads. Generating leads is one of them. And, I would say for that, especially when it's digital content, I look at it as I was an account manager for a specific patch of dirt out in Northern California. So my area of responsibility was really only the customers in that region. Now, it was cool because I'd start getting messages from people outside of my territory being like, hey, Chris, we have this project coming up and, we're just starting to look at it. And that's the type of lead you want all day long. Right. The one that's like pre-project, pre-proposal. And that's what Manufacturing Happy Hour started doing on a broader scale. Now I'm going to reel this back in a little bit because like I said, I was in a specific patch of dirt out there. And fit of it was just the credibility that came with it. The credibility between me and my local customers. They'd see that I knew what I was talking about. They'd see that, let's see. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep. Yeah, you froze up for a second, but we could hear your audio the whole time.
Okay, cool. All right. Sorry, I was just getting some messages from Zoom real quick. So I'm going to keep rolling. So anyway, so as we were going through that, I'd build up credibility with my customers. And in fact, I'd even bake it into let's say our annual like conversations about, hey, what type of planning do we want to do? I'm trying to go after some of these conversions at your account. Maybe I can get you in front of my Manufacturing Happy Hour audience. So there was a little bit, it was kind of a give and take at that point. You have those macro leads coming in from across the country, sometimes around the world. Then at the same time, you also get some credibility with your local customer base, as I was with an account manager, that I could leverage in the opportunities I was going after there.
Was there territory overlap? Like, did you get leads from other people's territories and then have to distribute them back to them, or how did that work?
Oh yeah. I mean, that happens. And that's just kind of, that happens at, I think any company has that happen in some way, shape, or form. Someone might reach out to you and they'd be in a different territory, but you know what? It goes both ways. At the end of the day, yeah, I'd be generating some leads for other people that I'd send their way, but whether it was through someone else doing a video series or someone else just learning about a project, I always felt Rockwell had a great collaborative culture in that regard that, hey, that's the way we're set up. It's okay to, here's your lead, you take it from here type thing.
Okay, that's interesting. And at this point, are you working with the marketing team and interacting with them? And as far as these lead handoffs go, and are they saying like, what's this guy doing over here? This guy's generating leads via digital marketing. Isn't that our turf? Isn't that what we're supposed to do?
Yeah, that's a fun conversation. I think this was something I was reflecting on earlier today also. Like, I think it goes back to just the way marketing is evolving. Like, I think a term that probably a lot of us in this audience are familiar with is UGC, user generated content. And at the end of the day, especially in a B2C space, we think of user generated content as like the end customer, the literal user at the end of the day. In the B2B space, there's another group, and that's all the employees that work for a 23,000 person company like Rockwell Automation. So the reality was where we saw things coming into play, I think what marketing organizations are doing now is they're recognizing that their employees are, mouthpieces for their business at the end of the day. And I think what I've seen savvy marketing organizations do is, create guidelines for companies that are for people that are out sharing information, like encouraging that original content, but, also trying to make sure it fits with the brand as well. You don't want to go too far one direction or too far the other direction where it doesn't resonate with your company's overall brand. But no, I wouldn't, back to the earlier question, I'd never say there were any type of conflicts. I think at the end of the day, when you have a culture that's interested in serving the customer and growing the business, you kind of don't, as a marketer, when I see someone come up with a good idea, I'm the first person to give them credit and say, I'm probably going to borrow that idea though also and use it as well. Oh yeah.
I mean, we've built Winbound on stealing other people's ideas. We're very good at that. And just, but you do take other people's ideas and you modify them to your own framework and your own style. And I mean, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. And the reality is manufacturing is an industry that's a little it's a little behind other industries. So I don't really have to come up with many original ideas. Everything I do is usually like, wow, this worked in the podcasting industry, or wow, this worked in the craft beer industry. And you just pull it into, give it a manufacturing spin, and you're not reinventing the wheel. You're just taking something else that was already working elsewhere.
So tell me a little bit, we've talked about what Winbound does, and one of our strategies is we call it the digital twin marketing strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And the digital twin, for folks who don't know about this, is a digital recreation of a piece of manufacturing equipment or a process. And we say, make a digital twin of your salesperson. So when people are searching and they're online and your salesperson isn't there and can't get to them, your content is there. And I think, Chris, you've done a great job of making a digital twin of Chris Luecke with your podcast. And it's really admirable. What do you think if and it's not just manufacturing that runs into this problem. It's any kind of B2B company. It's any B2C company with a little more complex sale where you need a salesperson involved. What are some ways that marketing and sales, and I didn't throw this to you earlier, but what are some of the ways marketing and sales can kind of collaborate so, we in the marketing end and the content producers can get a salesperson like you close to the action, get your ideas, and, bring them to the forefront?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to answer this a little, because I talked about this a little bit in one of the last answers where it's like, hey, marketing needs to take advantage of this user-generated content that salespeople are coming up with. I think marketing has a knack for that at the end of the day. They're looking for things that can amplify the message. I think where there might be a little more work that needs to be done is really getting salespeople to see themselves as marketers as well. And I think we've seen more of that happen with COVID because we can't be face-to-face anymore. Like all the things I was doing it put me in a good spot when COVID happened, to be honest. When I was told to stay home, it's like, oh, good. Well, I was already doing all these digital things to stay front of mind with customers. One thing that I preach is like, and this is how I manage my calendar in general. If I have a to-do, like I put it in a slot on my calendar. The reality is salespeople should block off, say, I don't know, start with an hour a week. Block off an hour a week for LinkedIn time to post something, respond to comments, the same way you'd schedule a sales call, and just get in that habit of saying, hey, I'm going to be on LinkedIn from this time period every other day, every day, whatever it is. Some people will get more use out of it than others. But when it comes to breaking down that silo, sales, marketing, sales, I tend to think, marketing organizations, modern marketing organizations, there are some that probably still struggle with this and think that a message needs to be perfectly crafted this way and fit in this box. And they just ignore any user-generated content, no matter how good it is. I think most marketing organizations are getting the hang of saying, hey, this was good content. Let's make sure we use it and get it out to our audience. I think it's salespeople that are starting to learn, like, wow, these marketing tools are actually sales tools. At the end of the day, a good marketing practice is a good sales practice if it's being done right.
Okay, so I feel like you're a little bit of an anomaly. I feel like you are a performer first. Okay, you've got this performance background, and you're an engineer, correct? You're educated as an engineer.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier. I don't know why that slipped my mind. I guess I haven't really done engineering for 10 years, to be honest.
Right, but like in manufacturing, that's typically how it occurs, is an engineer comes in or a technician, and then they know the product, they know the processes, and then they're trained to be good at the marketing. And what I'm wondering though is, like, salespeople like yourself, like you're a natural performer. You're like, get me in front of the camera, get me behind the mic. Are there a lot of salespeople like that? Because I've worked in marketing roles with salespeople, and let me tell you, salespeople are my favorite type of creature in the world. They're always the life of the party.
Yeah,
everybody loves to be around them. They're full of whatever, but they're a blast to be around, but sometimes when you get them in a situation like this, they might freeze up a little bit, and it's out
Yeah.
of their comfort zone. Do you see that, or are people evolving? What do you think?
I do. It's the weirdest thing because I think you're right. There's probably an element of anomaly about me in that, I've been on stage and things like that before. But the reality is salespeople are on stage when they're giving a presentation to their customers. You got an audience of 10 people there. What I try to do to kind of break things down to get salespeople, I'm going to talk specifically in terms of getting salespeople more comfortable in front of the camera. If I'm shooting one of my videos, I always point to the camera and say, look, that right there is the easiest customer you're ever going to talk to. It's not going to talk back. It's not going to tell you your price is too high. It's not going to tell you your quality sucks. Like, it's just going to sit there and listen. Just talk to it the way you talk to a regular customer. And one thing I've done and learned through having gone to podcasting is I think where I've seen people freeze up is when they have to do like a short form message. If you got to get something across in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, that's where people get nervous. They're like, wow, the pressure's on. I really need to get this message across. And to an extent, that's true. You got to keep it tight and concise. Where I've seen people get more comfortable is when you kind of forget the camera's there. Like when I do a long form podcast interview for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, you're just having a conversation. The camera's just kind of off to the side recording it. You don't get nervous there. I usually try to use that as, let's say, a gateway into getting more comfortable in front of camera. It's like, look, you just did that for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and you didn't even think about it because, you kind of took the pressure off yourself. And that's kind of a good way to ease into maybe doing more forward-facing videos like we're doing today.
Sure. I see some comments coming up here and some questions. And Chase had a question about talking about engineers that are trained on the marketing side. And what would you recommend for someone in the opposite situation, marketing background, less engineering background? And Chase, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Maybe you could elaborate on that while I go on to the next question. So what are you going to tell a maverick salesperson who's following in your footsteps? And, are you going to tell somebody to go out and do a podcast? Are you going to tell them to do videos? I mean, what if somebody, what's your recommendation for a salesperson? You mentioned LinkedIn a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My recommendation, my most general answer to this is play to your strengths. Back to what I mentioned earlier, I was just thinking, it's like, I'm good at sales, but I haven't used this performance background that I've had for like 6 years. Maybe there's a way I can mix that into what I do. Because the reality is video and podcasts, that's just one way to reach them. You talked about it earlier. I mean, Greg, you do a lot of written content. If you're more comfortable writing, that's a great way to do it. One trick that I've been told, it's like, hey, if you write a big email explaining something, you can turn that into a blog post. You can copy paste some of that into a newsletter, things like that. Like, I would say my 2 pieces of advice would be like, play to your strengths. Think about the things that you're good at, what you naturally excel at, what you enjoy. And then also think about some of the things you're already doing. Like, at the end of the day, if you're writing emails that could be repurposed easily as a blog post or could be repurposed as a short video as well, look for ways to do that. I mean, because repurposing content seems to be the name of the game right now. And it's a great way to amplify it and reach different mediums. So those would be my 2 pieces of advice to salespeople. Play to your strengths and look at ways to repurpose some of the things you're already doing.
Let's talk a little bit about your process with the podcast and with the leads.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's always this kind of conception that, misconception, I should say, that I put content out there, the leads are just going to come in, I'm going to call them, it's going to be, they're going to have a deal. And now, maybe that happened with you. I mean, with our clients and what we do, sure, that does happen. But there's also a kind of an interaction with the salesperson where it's like, yeah, you might get somebody who likes your comments or likes, maybe subscribes to a newsletter or something like that. But really, do you do anything in terms of your inbound leads to cultivate, get them in the pipeline, follow up with them? Maybe you could talk about your process.
Great question. Well, I'll start with saying the first person I'm going to hire when I have an opportunity to hire an assistant is going to be someone a little more operations minded. I'm very creative. I could use a little help on the process side. I think, it's back to the strengths and weaknesses thing. Know yourself, know what you're good at. What I will say is in terms of nurturing leads, and this is, I mentioned it briefly, but I think this is a very important part and something that a lot of people don't utilize, that is just an incredibly powerful tool, is utilizing the strength of community. I never really needed to hard sell anyone that interacted with me through manufacturing happy hour right out of the gate, because I could say, by the way, we've got a community of 300 people that are, go-getters in the manufacturing space. Greg, you're a part of that group. It's just people that are, it's a give group. It's people that do different things, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's content marketing, whether it's salespeople at different companies. Just a way to keep people engaged, get them part of the group, and bring them into the community. And at the end of the day, it's full of forward-thinking people that want to advance the industry, want to help other people advance their careers. So that's where I have the most success in, let's say, nurturing a lead per se, because the reality is manufacturing, as a rule of thumb, maybe at least with my experience in the automation space, I'll say it's a long sales cycle. You don't know when someone's going to have that big automation project. It might be a year down the line, might be a few years down the line. Find ways to keep that person engaged until something comes up, because I think too often we think of leads in terms of someone coming in when they have a project proposal that's about to go out, and more often than not, that's too late to really get engaged. So to give kind of a backdoor answer to your question, I think community is an incredible way to nurture leads, and until they're ready to enter the buying process in a lot of ways.
So true. Stay in front of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about, this kind of follow up real quick on this. Do you use any kind of metrics in terms of, I know when you hire your operations assistant, you're going to start quantifying all this. Do you use any kind of metrics with your leads in your podcast?
Yeah, I mean, so great question. I do look at listenership. That's a big one right now. I mean, because the podcast has been for some context, I've been running a video series for 4 years. The podcast has been running for about 1 year of that. And I'm always looking to see if listenership is going up. I mean, the main metric I'm looking at the end of the day, especially as I'm in my role now, the marketing leader for a startup based here in Milwaukee, as we make content, we're looking at how many new followers we're getting, how many of these are going to be sales qualified leads. Sales qualified leads is really the number one thing that I'm looking at right now. And this is an area where I go from being a sales guy to being more of a marketer. I'm getting more familiar with things like bounce rate and looking at how long people are engaged on the website. But at the end of the day, my sales background, I'm thinking almost purely in terms of what are the qualified leads and are these going to turn into opportunities and orders?
Let's talk a little bit about, just get back to the podcasting a little bit.
Sure.
Tell us about any kind of pleasant surprises you've had from your podcasting efforts. Anything that came about that you really weren't expecting?
Gosh. I mean, it's just been a blast. I'm so glad I did this at the end of the day. I mean, it's almost, the list is too long in some ways. I will say one of the most convenient things about it, since we're on a sales and marketing call, this is how I'll answer this question. All of a sudden you don't have to pitch your product to someone anymore when you want an introduction with them or when you want to talk to them. You can be like, hey, I host this podcast. I think you might be interested. Or, hey, I have this community with this podcast. I think you might benefit from being a part of it. All of a sudden you have more doors to get in front of your ideal client than you did before. I think the serendipity of getting to meet some influencers along the way and talk to people that I probably, that are, I would say, B-list celebrities, maybe, for lack of a better word, that I probably never would have gotten to talk to otherwise, except for having a podcast. That's been kind of a cool deal. But maybe the anecdote I'll wrap this question up on was I filmed an episode with Rockwell's CEO probably about 2 or 3 years ago, I think. And you know, it was just like a 45-minute thing on a topic that he was passionate about when I happened to be in Milwaukee. And then I bumped into him a year later and I'm like, hey, Blake, good to see you again. You know, you might not remember me. He's like, oh yeah, no, I remember you. You're the guy with the beer. You know, it was just kind of it was just like all of a sudden I had a personal brand that was memorable. And I'm just, and that kind of sealed it. It's like, oh, well, Blake knows me as the beer guy. I guess that's not the worst thing for the CEO to know you as.
Well, I think content marketing, I mean, I've done a couple podcast interviews and been interviewed, and they're absolutely a blast. I mean, who doesn't like to just get up and talk about themselves? I mean, you know, of course, but it's so much fun to also interview as well. And I think content marketing in general, if you're doing it right, I mean, I open up the show and talking about how we like to collaborate. I'm completely sincere about that. I mean, when I used to be a copywriter in an ad agency, you get a little cynical about it, and you know, you don't see people, you're just kind of writing copy. Content marketing, if you're collaborating and doing what we're doing here, it's a blast. I mean, you get to meet people, like you said, you're running into influencers you had never met before, and it's really exciting and it's fun. Good stuff.
It's kind of fun when people like recognize you as well too. Like it doesn't happen often. It's happened like less than probably a handful of times where it's still novel. But like I would be at a trade show and someone would be like, I feel like I've seen you from somewhere before, and then they'd put two and two together that I'm the guy that films tech videos while drinking a beer. So it's kind of cool in that regard.
Yep. LinkedIn famous is always a good thing. Anything that happened, any mistakes? Tell us about your worst podcast. Anything you learned, any mistakes that you can share with us?
I mean, yeah, the worst podcasts are always going to be the first ones. Like anyone that starts a podcast after you've been doing it for like a year or so, you should hate your first episodes. You're like, wow, I can't believe like I had this format. I can't believe I asked these questions in this insincere way. Like you'll look, you know, I think a lot of people are so focused, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing. You want to get it right. So you might overplan a little bit to get it right the first time, but just, you know, they were too long. They were, questions were kind of random. I was too rigid with my structure. I wasn't able to like dive into a conversation the right way. I'm trying to think of a scenario where things just really went.
Chris, you froze up a little bit.
That's, you know, the norm. So, but nevertheless, it's yeah, I would say your first episode. Oh, that first episode was awesome. You probably waited too long to launch.
Right. Do you, as an interviewer, do you find yourself listening to other people interviewing and thinking in your head, why didn't you do that follow-up question? What are you doing? Are you getting more critical now that you're doing so many interviews? And you're frozen up a little bit, Chris.
Greg, also while we're waiting for Chris, do you want to go back to a couple of questions? Maybe we can unmute Chase and give him an opportunity to elaborate.
Sure.
All right, thanks.
Chris, you with us? Still frozen.
Tony, you better get the accordion out.
Don't threaten me. It's a recorder.
So
thanks, Chase.
Chase got his question answered.
Yeah. Thanks, Chase. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Tony, you had a good point about podcasting being at the content marketing at the personal level. It's what you want in a sales. You want to get personal. You have a one-on-one relationship with your listener.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, who's thought of who's listened to a morning radio show on their commute? Obviously we're not commuting now, but who's listened to a morning radio show for more than 5 years, more than 10, more than 15, right? That's a personal relationship, right? You get to know those people over time, and podcasting is even more personal than that because it's a small amount of people, really.
You know, and I think I wanted to just jump on what he said and extend on that. Like when you said, I was just actually writing a blog post today, and I was writing about what type of content should you choose. And Chris has stole my thunder right there, because that's exactly what I wrote. Play to your strengths, because what you can do is once you get that baseline, you just got to get that initial, it's almost like writing a rough draft, get that piece out, and then you can do so many things off of it. You know, like this conversation here should give, should give rise to a blog post. I mean, that's what we do at AMA. We have people who blog out the content from these presentations. So just, you need that starting point to launch, and create the content, no matter what it is. Get your message out there. Then you can repurpose it in myriad ways, many ways. So,
Well,
I'm
there you
back
go.
now, by the way.
there it is.
I don't know where I cut out, but I do want to say, when I was answering that question, I'm like, I can't really think of a scenario where I've had like an equipment failure in the middle of a podcast before, but the irony of that occurring right in the middle of that answer, I apologize. I don't know where I cut out, but I'm happy to be back.
This moment was the biggest mistake.
Exactly. No, just the technical issues. You've been great, Greg. I apologize for dropping off there for a second. I don't know what went wrong.
Well, internet happens, right? So
You know it.
I want to just get to this point, and please, folks, if you've got some questions, go ahead and ask them now, because I'm about done with my ridiculously long list. But I want to get to the equipment side of it, because I do think it's important. I've been, dragging my feet, and probably you can tell from the cruddy sound quality. What kind of equipment do you recommend, especially for podcasting, but really for interviews? Because I get interviewed by Alison DeFord for Manufacturing Out Loud, and Ray Zigliano, I'm going to butcher his name. And they—
Zaganto, Ray Zaganto. Yep.
Ray Zigliano, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Yes. And I could tell that my voice, I don't have a microphone, and it sounded probably horrible. So tell us about what your recommendations are for equipment, or if you have a link, because I know you've written about it in the past.
I do. Yeah. Funny enough, this is a good time for this conversation, because I was using this until a moment ago, I believe, and now I'm using the webcam that I'm using. So a couple tools that I'd recommend. One, I'll start with microphones. Microphones are the easiest thing. This is the one that I've used for a long time. It's a pretty good intermediate podcast microphone. It is a Audio Technica ATR 2100. Now there's a newer model out, and I'll try to pop it in the chat here.
Okay.
It's an ATR 2100X is the new model. And why this is a great mic to have, it's like $100 price point, and it has USB and XLR. So you can use it for like a PA system. You can plug it into your computer. It's super versatile. And it's dynamic microphone, so it only picks up what's being said in front of it. So if this were plugged in, wouldn't pick it up as much as if it were over here right now. There are other microphones that pick up a lot of background noise. So a ATR 2100X is my go-to mic. That's the most versatile. And honestly, that's the number one thing you need. Beyond that, to be honest, we would all be okay on a podcast today, even if we're just using our computer audio. Because the main thing I like to stress in this scenario, it's not as much about the mic, but as long as there's good content, people will keep listening. It can't be terrible audio at the end of the day, but if it's still good enough, and the content and conversation is great, I'm going to listen to it regardless. We all listen to podcasts that are like Serial, or these ones that are all assembled from different pieces that have phone conversations on it. The reason we listen to it is not because the audio is crystal clear in all those scenarios. It's because it's a good story that's told throughout it. So equipment's important, like a good microphone, like we just talked about, but remember, content first. At the end of the day, the content needs to be good, because it doesn't matter how good your audio is if it's mediocre conversations.
Jordan's got a question. Hey, Jordan, glad you could join us today. Jordan and I connected in a manufacturing group. I'm glad you could join us, Jordan. How many episodes or content should you have built up before releasing a podcast?
Good question. I don't know. I'd probably go. Some will tell you like have like 8 or so ready to go. I think 4 or so, 4 or 5. Like a strategy that I commonly see is people will release 2 episodes on the day they release. That way, there's some 2 things people can listen to versus just 1. So you give people the opportunity to listen a little bit, and then having a couple, probably a few after that. Having your first month's worth of content is good, because the thing that every podcaster learns very, very quickly is podcasts do take a lot of work if you want to put out a good show. And it's a manageable amount of work, but it's probably more work than you're thinking. On the flip side of that is once you get into a routine, it goes a lot faster, but you're just learning it the first time. So it's going to take some time. So I would say I'm going to answer with 5. 5 would be the right amount to have if you're going to do a weekly show, because then you have month number 1 taken care of.
Yeah, I agree. And I think from a content, like when we do our content for our clients, we try and build up a huge cushion, because I mean, it's really to take the pressure off yourself. And Stephen King used to write, he'd shoot for writing a book a year. And then sometimes he'd write an extra book during the course of the year. So he'd have cushion. He could take a year off if he wanted.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, like build in, like, what's my vacation? Like right now we're adding in content because we know December is going to be holidays and stuff like that. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
The reason I answered it that way, though, also is because I never want someone to get intimidated by needing to think they need too much content to get started. People should still start at the end of the day. Don't let the fact that you probably should have a little bit of a backlog of content built up, but don't let it overwhelm you to the point that you never get started, because that's what I don't want to have happen to people as well.
Right. So I've got a good question here from Ryan O'Leary. And he's a manufacturing sales rep, and he sells stamping, casting, injection molding, and fabrications to local OEMs. So pretty specific, what he's trying to do. And he's wondering what would be a good show topic for him.
Ooh, well, one thing I will say right off the bat is anything with stamping and molding, like we have a cool situation in the manufacturing industry in that our stuff looks cool on video at the end of the day, like stamps, presses, etc. There's a reason to show how it's made was so successful, is people like seeing how stuff is made. If I were to come up with a concept for a show, and Greg, I think you'll like this because this is a very content marketing centric answer. Like, think about the challenges your customers are having. What are the most common questions that you're answering? What are you trying to solve for them? Like, make sure there's value so that someone's going to tune in. I have 2 more tips on top of this. The other thing is, if whether you're writing, whether you're doing a podcast, whether you're doing a video, I tend to find it helpful to tell people up front what they're going to get out of the video. Like in fact, I just posted a video today about Automation Fair saying, hey, here are the 3 biggest things I would check out at Automation Fair. So that way people know exactly what's going to happen in the video as it gets started. And the last piece of this, I can't forget it. I know it's on the tip of my tongue. Solving challenges, telling people what they're going to get out of it. Maybe I'm just going to go with 2 right now. I can't remember the third one. Those are the top 2 I have, though. Oh, I know what it is. Keep it, and this is maybe my background is a bit of a bias on it. Keep it somewhat entertaining. Don't forget that there should be a little entertainment to it, whether that's just a fun anecdote at the start of an email. The easiest way I can frame this up as to why entertainment is important, because if you're posting content on LinkedIn, for example, or Instagram, Instagram's a better example. You're competing with someone's attention when they're looking at cars, when they're looking at, their friend's new baby, when they're looking at, their favorite new video game that came out on Instagram, whatever it is. You want to do something that's going to draw people in. So that's why, to an extent, why I added the beer element to what I do with my content, because when someone sees me talking to someone over a beer, they're a little more intrigued than just saying, oh, this guy's talking about technology in front of a technology wall. That would have been what it was without beer. So entertainment, solving a problem, and gosh, now I forgot the other one.
Well, I think too, if I could jump in on what Ryan is asking, because we get this a lot, like Ryan's probably, you might be thinking about it from a sales perspective, like
Sure.
the whole podcast about my product. And I mean, I think what you're talking about here, Ryan, is very specific industry. And you have an opportunity potentially, and Chris, chime in what you think about this, but how many podcasts are there out there about stamping, casting, injection molding, and fabrications? I mean, you could be the voice of the industry, the podcast about the industry. And there's so many things that are involved in that industry that are specific to it. And you could just talk about the industry. And like Chris is saying, there's a whole host of things from operations to marketing to finance. And you could be wide ranging and just, build your brand and build your personal brand around all those topics. I heard a podcast with a business owner, a manufacturing owner the other day. He was talking about getting through COVID, and it was really fascinating because he talked about everything from the marketing to building out bonuses and paying back pay once they got back up to business, to supporting local restaurants. He covered the whole thing, and it was fascinating. So Ryan, I would get specific in your industry, but then you can get very broad in all your content.
Yeah, and Greg, your answer was way better. And I would say the one sentence way I usually summarize that for people is pick a niche, because you don't need Joe Rogan numbers to be successful. If you have a very specific niche and you have 50 dedicated listeners, 500 dedicated listeners, whatever that is. I like showing a picture of my favorite concert venue in San Francisco on a sold out night. It's only 500 people, but that's still a big crowd you're talking to. And if you're the guy for injection molding, that puts you in a pretty good spot. So picking that niche, awesome. Greg, thanks for summarizing that better than I had with my all over the place answer.
No, I mean, and Ryan shot back, I wonder if my OEM customers really care that much about stamping. And then Steve replied, what pain do you solve? How do you do it?
Yeah.
So I think what Steve's saying here, and Steve right there, but figure out who your target market is and what their pain point is, and just think about what's specific to them. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, no, exactly. You have those conversations every day with the folks that you're talking to when you're trying to sell the products and the solutions that you provide. So bring some of those to life in the podcast, because I'm sure for every person you talk to, there's got to be 10, 20, 50 other people that you could be talking to that have the same exact issue or problem.
The other cool thing about starting a show or a podcast is your audience will start telling you what they want to hear more about. You only have to guess for like the first 5 or 6 episodes before your audience becomes your feedback mechanism. Like Greg, back to your question earlier, what metrics do you look at? Whenever I do a cybersecurity episode on Manufacturing Happy Hour, I get double the downloads. So I'm like, I should probably keep talking more about cybersecurity. So pay attention to that feedback loop, because it'll start up sooner than you think.
What are some of your favorite podcasts, Chris?
Yeah, so the ones that jump out for me, one that I haven't listened to it as much recently, but when it was running, Noah Kagan was running a great show. I think he was employee number 30 at Facebook. It was just a really tactical, it was always just 20 minutes long. It wasn't long, and that was one of the things I liked about it. And it was very focused around marketing strategies and things along those lines. And the thing I do this in my shows now, the thing Noah would do at the start of his episodes, and I hinted at this earlier, he'd say, hey, here are 3 things you're going to learn from this episode. And I think that's one of the things that I always appreciate. Like, I like doing that for people because, for example, if I listen to the Tim Ferriss show, or if I listen to the Joe Rogan show, those are 3-hour-long episodes. Like, they're arrogantly long, and I have no idea what it's going to be about in the front end. And I could save myself a lot of time. Normally, I just don't listen to it now. That's what I do. But I could save myself a lot of time if they just said, hey, this is what this episode's about. And then I know it's like, great, I want to invest 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes. And the worst thing that could happen is a member of your audience could be like, oh, well, this episode's not important to me. I'm not going to listen to this one. I'll just listen to the next one. And you just save them a bunch of time. They're going to be grateful for it, and they're going to keep tuning in. And then the second one I'd say is Jordan Harbinger. Jordan Harbinger show, he's known as the Larry King of podcasting. The way he asks challenging questions, gets into people's why. I listen to it to become a better interviewer, because the way he interviews and the type of questions he asks are, as far as I'm concerned, the best that I've ever come across.
It is a real skill, and once you
Mhm.
try and do it, like I'm stumbling through this, you know, it takes a lot of practice. Bob Costas, sportscaster, is one of the best interviewers I've ever
Mhm.
heard. He recognizes the craft.
Yeah.
Jake Hall wondering, Chris, when people like and comment on your posts, how long are you waiting to reach back out to them in a personal message to see what type of opportunities might be available?
I wish I had a better process for this right now, because and part of it's just because I've relocated, I'm still getting settled, I'm starting a company. I have a backlog of messages I'm trying to get back to right now. I don't know. I usually, if I can, within a day or so, you know, I kind of let things resonate for a bit, see what type. I mean, if I happen to be on LinkedIn at the time and I see a comment, and I might respond to it quickly and things like that. But yeah, you know, because I think the most powerful thing you can get going sometimes is when your audience starts talking to the rest of your audience and letting them kind of answer questions. It's why I think community is so important, because you have that group, and then all of a sudden it's not all on me anymore to answer everything and respond to everything. There are other people that can be resources at that point.
So Trisha from the Virtual Foundry here in Stoughton, who's got a very cool product and a very cool company, is you should check them out. Chris could be a guest. Trisha could be a guest down the road, but she's wondering, can the podcast, you know, can they be short, like 5 minutes when you're starting out?
Yeah, I think, and by the way, there are some shows that I think are only like 5 to 10 minutes long. It really just depends on what format you're comfortable with, and more importantly, what format your audience wants. Like the answer I gave, I prefer a 20-minute podcast. It's odd because I end up doing 40-minute podcasts, but my audience seems to gravitate towards those. So it's not about what I like, it's about what my audience likes. But you know, it's one of those things where, yeah, you can, I've had some shorter episodes too, and I think some people are more stringent on this than I am. Some people, like, if you're a 20-minute show, you got to keep being a 20-minute show. I'm like, you know what? If you've got good content and it's only 5 minutes long, just put it out there. I mean, just let people know. It's like when you're recording, it's like, hey, this is a short episode, but I thought this was important for you to hear. Something like that. You can just set expectations with your audience at that point. I think that's what's most important, setting expectations with your audience.
So we got a question from Karen. Can you review beginner tools quickly again? And I'm not sure if she meant equipment.
Sure. Well, I think I only really talked about the microphone, so I'll go a little bit deeper on that. You know, like I said, I think, Tony, you might have shot out a link to your microphone of choice as well. What I use is by no means the only method, but having a USB microphone so that you can interview people remotely over your computer. And then, you know, I think we're all used to Zoom by now for recordings, things like that. This is a great platform. I use one that's podcast specific called squadcast.fm. That's an important tool. And then, so just a platform to interview people on remotely. And I'm only going to answer this in terms of remotely because it's not like we're doing a lot of face-to-face stuff these days. Then the last thing is I use, when I produce my own episodes, sometimes I outsource it, but if I produce my own, I use a software called Audacity, works on Mac and Windows, and it's free and it's pretty intuitive. So those, as far as like the things that I think are essential, having a microphone, having a platform to do interviews on, and having a platform to like edit together, those are the 3 things I would recommend.
Do you use Camtasia at all? I use that just for my video editing, and I know you can put in multiple tracks and audio. Yeah,
so for my videos, I use Final Cut Pro. That's what I've done on the video front when I do videos. In fact, right before this, maybe it's because my computer's still recovering from all the video editing that it was having so many troubles. I was in Final Cut Pro getting a video together for Automation Fair. But yeah, the tools I use are just kind of a guide, I'd say, but Camtasia works, Final Cut Pro, if you want to make a little bit more of an investment in it, that works as well. I know a lot of people still use not GarageBand but iMovie, whatever it is, the one that's built into the Mac. What I always kind of say, it's like, again, don't let the equipment or the software be an excuse, because you probably have access to more than you think right out of the gate.
I remember talking to a professional photographer, and he's like, this camera right now is like equivalent to my big camera with all the the really nice Canon that he had. He's like, so there, like you said, there's really no excuse. A lot of these softwares will get you where you need to go.
I mean, photographers have the best answer to it, because they're like, the best camera there is the camera that you have on you at the time. Like, that's their philosophy around that.
That's good. I like that. So Chris, we will send out an email. I know we're at the top of the hour here. Ryan threw one more. You got time for one more question?
I'm not in a rush. Yeah, I've got this much beer left. So, that's how much time I still have.
How much is left in the craft marketing? Ryan's asking about SEO for your podcast. How do you publicize it? That's a great question. How do you build listenership?
Oh, how do I build listenership for a podcast? Well,
SEO specifically, Ryan wanted to know.
Oh, SEO specifically. I will be honest. I have not done a great job of utilizing SEO so far. I haven't done keyword optimization on like my web pages yet, because to be honest, I've had more success growing my show. As far as growing a podcast, my specific answer is going to be the most successful way to do it is jump on other podcasts, I think. Like, because then you're already talking to the right audience there. You're talking to podcast listeners. And if you're on a relevant show, like, for example, Greg, you were just on MFG Out Loud. I was on MFG Out Loud a few months ago. That's the best way to get cross promotion, because it's like, oh, good. We have a B2B audience right here. I'm going to talk to them. They're already listening to podcasts. Again, this is me answering as a sales guy. I have not done the deep dive into SEO and keyword optimization the same way a marketer would have up to this point. But as a result, I've relied on other things like, what are my strategies to get in front of the right audience, and appearing on other podcasts has been my answer to it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we talk a lot about content. Everybody talks about content, but not enough people talk about distribution of that content and getting the content out there. And what you just talked about there, getting in front of somebody else's audience is a great example of distribution of your show, getting the word out there. And Jordan just put in, he found, Manufacturing Happy Hour through LinkedIn. I mean, that's a great source of, distribution right there.
Well, the thing, and another thing I try to teach people about podcasting is meet your audience where they are. So we just talked about it in terms of appearing on other podcasts, but too often when I see people sharing about their podcast on LinkedIn, it's in the form of a link to their podcast. There's a place for that, but why not put a 1-minute video clip or a 1-minute audiogram from your podcast? Because that's the type of content people are engaging with when they're scrolling down on LinkedIn. Like, you're trying to interrupt their feed to an extent, like get their attention to be like, oh, I want to stop scrolling and I want to listen to this. That's when someone's like, oh, now I've heard a minute of this show. Maybe I should subscribe on Spotify, or maybe I should subscribe on iTunes.
Yeah, and I think what I really like about your approach, Chris, first and foremost, is that, and we say this a lot, I mean, because people talk about SEO, it's such a big part of content marketing, and it is. I mean, we do it too, obviously. It's a huge part of it. But really, at the end of the day, what is your content all about? It's about creating relationships and getting referral sources. And that's what you've done building Manufacturing Happy Hour. You've built this huge network and community of referral sources for you, because it's still all about referral sources. I mean, that's...
I mean, a perfect example is this what we're doing right now probably wouldn't be happening without Manufacturing Happy Hour. I mean, ultimately, Greg, that's how you and I met in a lot of ways. And that's how you and I have kept in touch on a regular basis. So, maybe that's one of the good things to wrap up on. Like this, what we're doing tonight is a perfect example of what starting a podcast can create. All of a sudden, you're in front of 24 people you might have never met before.
Exactly. That's what it's all about. Well, we will, I can, the last time I saw your glass, there seemed to be just a thin layer.
I got a little bit more.
Some suds left in there. So I want to thank you, Chris, for just taking the time. If people want to get in touch with you, they want to follow. Oh, you know what? One last thing. You didn't tell us what you're doing now because you are no longer
Yeah.
Rockwell. This is a big thing.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to share a link to the manufacturing happy hour industry community. That's where Greg and I hang out on a regular basis. If you're in manufacturing or even just in the B2B space, you're welcome to join. It's just a LinkedIn group. It's a cool group of people. I mean, it's an amazing crew. I think, Greg, you met some people through there. So I'll make sure you guys all have that link before I leave. But yeah. I recently left Rockwell because I got a premier sponsor for my podcast, and I'm helping a startup with their marketing, and I'm going to help other companies, kind of like what we talked about with, getting salespeople more comfortable around being marketers and things like that, and helping other people launch their podcasts and things along those lines. So more to come on that in the near future. But the reality is, podcasting has also very recently resulted in a career change for me right now. So. My first client is a company called steamchain.io. What we call a machine as a service company based here in Milwaukee. So, that probably is the right spot to end, just saying, hey, all of a sudden a podcast can turn into a pretty big career move for you.
Hey, I'm really happy for you, Chris. That is amazing. And it seems like a pretty natural evolution for you to build on your career and head in this direction. I'm really excited. Chris has put up the link in the chat window. Really excited to see what you come up with. And let us definitely stay in touch on how we can, tune into, become part of Chris's community. We want to hear more about how marketing and sales can work together and how salespeople can kind of follow your path in their own manner and, with their own groups. So